Seems so simple to breathe, and yet it appears we are making errors. We must learn how to breathe better. Fundamental to our life, even more than the food we eat, the water we drink is the air that we breathe, and yet we don't know how to do it. I spoke with James Nestor, who's an expert on breath, or at least has become one through investigation. He wrote that amazing book called, I think, Breath, the new science of the lost art. Also, he does mad stuff like swimming with whales, and I feel like he said that I could go and do that. I want to go and do that, although I'm really scared about it and I dream about it sometimes. Don't you think of how mad it would be to be underwater near a whale, the immensity of it, the unfamiliarity of being under the water, the corollary of being in the unconscious mind near a beast that you can't control. But I still might do it, I'm thinking about it. Anyway, in this clip, we talk about breath techniques. We talk about how we can, all of us, change our consciousness and change our experience of being alive through the breath. This conversation takes place on my podcast, Under the Skin, which you can subscribe to if you want. Please stay to the end of this video because I want to know what you think about it.
There's a couple of other people, I don't know what the hierarchies and awareness is, but in the world of breathing, there's one guy, English, Alan Dolan, who does sort of breath work that's sort of, when I've done it with him, you do it laying down, and it's sort of based on full breaths. And like when he was able to do this practice, it was sort of physical and hands-on, you know. And man, the trip off of that, this had sort of, I would argue, psychedelic qualities, almost like, well, I suppose if the seat or crucible of our being is attention, consciousness, breath, and being as fundamental as you've outlined here already in this podcast, like the altering breath alters consciousness itself, as well as these tangible medical anatomical improvements, enhancements, changes like that. Like I had like weird, what I could only describe as spiritual experiences. You had much of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful experience. You know, from Wim Hof breathing, whenever I do that at about the third or fourth round, things get serious in a wonderful way. There's a breathwork practice called holotropic breathwork.
Yeah, that's what that dude is. That's what Alan Dolan is.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is 3 hours in a room breathing as hard as you possibly can. Oh. So you go to all kinds of strange places. Some people really have some big releases here, because what this breathing does is it purposely stresses your body out. A lot of people think, well, why do I want to stress my body out? I'm stressed all day long. I want to relax. But this compounds the stress into one prescribed time, so you can focus all that, get all your stress out, and be relaxed the rest of the day, just like Wim Hof method. You know, you start your morning that way. That's a stressful breathing technique. It's not relaxing when you're, you know, but you're compounding the stress so that for the other 23 and a half hours of the day, your nervous system is calmed down. You know how to deal with things in life. The little stuff doesn't bother you as much. So that's what these breathing methods do, which is exactly what pranayama does, which is what breath of fire does. You know, it stresses you out so that you can chill the rest of the time.
I did this other work with this teacher called Biet Simpkin. She's pretty cool. And that one, right, it's you just the breath, you wouldn't think that it was all that. It's like you're on your knees and you do sort of abdominal inhalations while raising the arms, and then exhalations where you sort of bend over. And then on the final, which is only the fourth inhalation, you take your ass off your heels and sort of stand on your knees, you know, like standing on your knees. And like with a big inhale to the abdomen, hold for a while, and then release with a sort of strike here. That thing, it feels like it shuts down. Like this is what I feel like. And I've wanted to talk to someone, and this is clearly you're the man for the job, right? Because I thought because my bias is towards romanticism, transcendence, God is consciousness, except, you know, I'm down that road. I'm too far down that path ever to come back. But my sense was that someone that was an expert in respiration would regard what I was experiencing. This is what it feels like to me. Like my individual identity goes offline, but there is a kind of awareness that is transcendent, not only of kind of personal recollection, preference, etc., but almost beyond the semiotics of ordinary life. Like there's a space in there that's got a viewer in it, a self, as it were, but like it's not signals. It's weird in there, like it's an unspace, and it has a really interesting impact on me. I've often sort of joked about it and said, oh, like a probably a medically minded person would just say, well, that's sort of like hyperventilation or whatever, but it feels like it has some kind of profundity to it. I wonder what you think about that rather more particular experience around breath.
Well, I'm sure it is doing something to your body. It's affecting your brain. It's affecting your nervous system in some profound way. If that's the result from it, it would be interesting to measure what's happening to the body, what's happening to your nervous system function, your heart rate, your circulation, your brain waves. And that's where, to me, I think it gets interesting. This isn't to discount personal experience. I've had some very, very powerful experiences with breathing, but I've noticed that when you just talk about your personal experience, people just go, oh yeah, well, that's your thing. It's not going to work for me. Science is a way of leveling the field and saying, this is what we know, how it affects our biology. So we know that when we hyperventilate, we reduce the blood flow to our brain. And if we do this for long enough, we can reduce the blood flow by up to like 40% in extreme hyperventilation. So what this does is it cuts off different areas of the brain that have to do with perception, right? And so this feeling of rebirthing, that you're living again, is probably the body's response to thinking it's dying. You're simulating the effects of dying to the primitive parts of the brain, which allows you to then come back out of that and have a different context or view about yourself, about the world, about other stuff around you. And that's where I think it gets really powerful. This stuff is doing something to people. There was one researcher who used holotropic breathwork with 11,000 patients, psychiatric patients, people with schizophrenia, people with addiction. He said it worked better than anything else. He wouldn't have kept doing this if it hadn't have worked. And he followed 423 of them throughout the years and found that this was more effective than anything else. So it's allowing them to break through in some way, but it's veiled in this mystery. We don't know exactly what it's doing. And that, to me, is what makes it even more interesting.
Yes, and whether or not you sort of celebrate or narrativize the mystery as has customarily, or perhaps more accurately, traditionally happened, or not, it kind of doesn't matter, because the impact is the impact. Like when you hear sort of someone like Terence McKenna talking about like psychedelic plants, it's like it doesn't require your faith and belief. It's going to have a chemical reaction in your consciousness that you will experience. I mean, of course, we can bring our personal biases to it. And that kind of, it makes sense what you're saying about sort of death simulation, but that too for me has kind of spiritual connotations. And particularly when we sort of look at that, we can start to examine what the nature of self is using this rubric, like, a sense of some recollections, a taxonomy of preferred impulses and conditions, and to have access to a kind of baseline consciousness through these techniques does seem like it might facilitate a kind of rewiring. Could be very useful around addiction, and evidently conditions that are assumed to be more pathologically entrenched, such as the medical conditions you listed there, the schizophrenia or whatever.
Well, yeah, because that's how the brain works. So the more we think about a certain thing in a certain way, the more those neural connections are going to become stronger and stronger. And sometimes those connections aren't the connections we want. Those are the ones keeping us back. So what do? Do you just blunt it and put a blanket over it with tranquilizers? Tranquilizers work for a lot of people, but they're not addressing the core problem at all, which is why shock therapy, the reason why a lot of people think it works is because it sort of blows everything out so you can start again. It's the same thing that happens with psychedelics, with a lot of the research going on, in mushrooms right now, that allows the brain to sort of clear out those connections, start again. Ibogaine, there's been some very interesting research into that as well. Ayahuasca, but breath work fits into that as well. And in my view, this is something that's much more accessible. We know that it can help reboot you. It's allowing people to do this on their own terms and be in control of the journey they're taking, which for a lot of people I think is important, because for some people you would put them, under the influence of some drugs and they might really lose it. With breathing, you're in control. You've got, your own foot on the gas pedal of how far you want to take it.
Yeah, I like that idea too, James. And I like you saying there about the ECT, that it is the equivalent of just turning your laptop off. Just no, that's it. We're starting again. And that seems like I can imagine, I once spoke to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he said like that, the percentage of difference between us and our nearest relatives is like just a 2% DNA differentiation, and in that gap is culture, art, politics, space travel. If you envisage 2% further on from us, like that, they may look back at our ECT and our diets and our conduct and our materialism and our clumsiness almost aghast. And yes, I do like the idea that we can get beyond it.
Well, did you enjoy it? Are you breathing a bit more consciously, responsibly now? Do you want to learn more about breath techniques? Let me know what you want to know more about in the comments below. We read these comments. It's important to us that you stay connected with us. Please subscribe to my side channel, Awakening, upon which you are hopefully watching this now on YouTube. Consider please signing up to my mailing list so I can stay in regular contact with you. And please, if you want to, sign up to Luminary, where I have conversations like this every week, as well as doing guided meditations, some of which have a breath-based component to them. More important than any of that, well, actually also important, is come and see me live in the UK. I'm performing all over the UK from January to May 2022. If you enjoyed this video about breath, have a look at this video on a similar topic and maybe have a cheeky glance at this saucy guy. And in the meantime, and even beyond that, stay free.